Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today, I have the pleasure of David Brambell on the show. Good afternoon to you, David.
Good afternoon, Julian. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you on the show. You've got over 30 years of experience in the military and commercial operations, and you've brought organisations and teams through experiences of challenges of the Gulf War and fight against Ebola in Sierra Leone. You successfully achieved major organisational and cultural transformations in the army and for organisations in the commercial sector too, and delivered a record levels of operational performance, financial benefits, customer experience, and higher team engagement, achieving all these concurrently. Wealth of experience, and because we're talking about exploring crisis management leadership today, which I think it's great to have somebody from an ex-sort of military background, and how we anticipate and how we prepare for crisis. And we want to get in that for a moment. But before we get there, David, I want to ask you, what do you love about what you do?
Oh, great question, Julian. I mean, what I love is right now. What I love about what I do is the variety, working with interesting new problems, bringing a new perspective, and finding new solutions, and it's really exciting.
That's fantastic. It's always good to be passionate about things, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And if that thing you're passionate about can be your work, that's a real kind of win-win, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that one. So we're talking about crisis management today, and feels like crisis feels like quite a negative thing. But for you, from your background and from your experience, what is crisis management?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I think the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year is permacrisis for 2022, and I think we have, that will resonate with all of us. And for me, I mean, what is crisis management? Well, first of all, I think what is a crisis, and it's got to have. There are a couple of elements for me about what a crisis is. One is there must be jeopardy. There must be a bad outcome. Whether that's for a personal crisis or in business or national security or whatever it is. So there must be jeopardy, but also it's something that you can't cope with your normal structures and resources. And so crisis management is the business of responding to that situation, somewhere where there's jeopardy, you can't handle it with normal processes. And bringing other resources, other processes to bear in order to be able to respond to that crisis in a positive way.
So Jeopardy, there was a quiz show, wasn't there, called Jeopardy, I think. Yeah. So how do we in an organization define sort of jeopardy? How do you define crisis? Because I would say that could be quite a subjective thing as opposed to an objective thing. And how do you make it objective that we know this is deemed as a crisis, this is deemed as jeopardy? It's just like and we have to go outside our normal processes. How do you do that in an organization?
I mean, I suppose one route into that is kind of in through our approach to risk management. We might want to explore that a bit more deeply, but that jeopardy could take many forms. So in business, it might be financial. We're going to lose X amount. We're not going to hit it's going to hit the share price, or we're going to become insolvent or whatever. It might be around reputation. I've been working for almost all of this year with organizations in and around Ukraine, and I'll be going back to Moldova in a couple of days' time. There are dimensions which are about their business and their reputation, but fundamentally what most of those clients are concerned with is the safety of their people. So it's a multi-dimensional, I can't give you one thing that says this, it's financial or it's reputation or it's legal or whatever. It might be many of those things. And I think really important is to be able to recognize that this is a crisis that we're in, so that you can start to respond effectively as rapidly as possible and not let yourself drift into a crisis.
And when we recognize there's a crisis, and I'd like to draw in some of your experience, perhaps when you worked in the Gulf War. which for me feels like a crisis environment, and probably for you, there's probably some normality to that, and then there was crisis. How do we, I suppose, galvanize and bring people without that word crisis? Sounds very, there's a lot of emotion behind it and can create all sorts of things going in people's heads that could cause the crisis to become either worse or very difficult to handle. How do we encapsulate that in a way that, yes, flag to people there is a serious situation of potential jeopardy or whatever that might be, but we need to obviously handle this? How do we balance that?
I don't think we need to be too shy about using the word crisis or indeed or emergency or quite emotive word. You're right. The military, fighting wars is what they do, so they almost aren't crises. But crises emerge within them. And so in my experience with my troop of 50 soldiers in the first Gulf War, you have a vehicle that breaks down. Well, I still need to achieve my mission. 25% of my vehicles are now not working. What am I going to do? Well, you need to get all hands to the pump and recognize that this is something that is taking us out of our normal operating pattern and that we need to operate differently. And it's important that people recognize that. I mean, in my military context, we wouldn't have used the word crisis or emergency, and that would have just said, right, that's broken down. You two stay and fix it. You 8, get in there, and we're going to crack on with the mission. There's a danger if you get too shy of using emotive language that you kind of patronize the people around you. And certainly my experience with clients in Ukraine is some of them have really struggled to have a grown-up conversation with their people. We might get into that a bit more deeply later on.
So just going back to the military, and obviously breaking down, and because obviously that was going to impact your mission, obviously that's clearly an issue and you have to resolve it. And you say you don't use the word crisis or emergency in military. What would you use for a scenario which is outside the normal jeopardy type thing?
That's really interesting. I don't think we'd use a word. If this would just be, this is the problem we've faced. This is what we're going to do about it. We would have really slick drills. So if the plan has to change, I suppose the point is the situation's changed. I'm not going to be able to achieve my mission on the current plan, so the plan has to change. And so recognizing that moment, and then using a kind of series of drills the army would use. So, I would get together the command group of my troop. That's the team of people who are the decision makers and the leaders of the different elements within the troop. Get them together, explain the problem, and maybe find out what the problem really is. And all I know is we've got a problem, but I don't quite know what it is. So get those people together to get that information. So we've got a shared understanding. And in the military, it would be around having a drill. And what that drill did was get the right people in the right place to ask the right questions. And I think that fundamentally there's a kind of myth of over planning, that you can plan for everything. We all know failing to plan is planning to fail. So you should plan, and plans are important, but they're probably not going to. They're not. What you do is very rarely exactly what you planned, and certainly in that crisis situation, fast moving, you don't control all the levers and so on. And so having those kind of drills where you're able to get the team together, understand what the problem is, focus on what the mission is, and find a new way of moving towards the mission. And that, to me, that's the difference between, I use the word respond quite a lot. What is the difference between respond and react? And I think, by definition, I'm not sure there really is. But when I use them, you know, a reaction is something that is almost instinctive. You're kind of forced into, and a response is a more deliberate, considered, and intentional reaction, which moves you in a direction you want to move. So rather than just away from danger or towards danger, you know, rather than sort of instinctive reaction, it's a response is a more considered, more positive. And that is a really key element, is to be focusing on responding rather than reacting. Now, that only, I mean, you know, you need to define what you mean by those two kind of words. They mean a different thing to me.
And in the military, and you say you don't use the word crisis, how does people know there's a serious situation? Is it because you employ these drills? Is that how it's flagged?
Yeah, well, one of the so there's a decision-making process that's taught certainly in British military doctrine and throughout NATO, called the command estimate. And you ask a series. They ask a series of questions. And question number 4 in this list is, has the situation changed? So it's, you know, what is the enemy doing? What does my commander want to me achieve? What resources have I got, and freedoms and so on? But has the situation changed? And that's one of the you know, military culture. One of the phrases that is often used is, "Oh, well, this feels like a question 4 moment. The situation is different from the one we'd anticipated." And what that might mean is that my mission isn't relevant anymore. And recognizing that, but still being able to do something positive, so not pointlessly capturing the hill, which is no longer relevant, but equally not just doing nothing because capturing the hill is not relevant anymore. You know, what is it that I could do that is a positive step in the direction that the organization needs? You know, needs to go. So understanding not just, you know, that superficial being given orders, I obey the orders, but understanding the intention behind them. What is it we're trying to achieve? What effect have I got to create that's going to move the whole organization towards that bigger goal? And there's a good friend of mine, Anna Turvey, who's a magnificent a Paralympian skier, and she uses a little power of 3 to talk about resilience. So she's talking about individual resilience, but I think it translates. And her little mnemonic is dream, team, routine. And so the dream for me in that context we've just been talking about is, what's the aim? What are we trying to achieve? What, if you like, what is the mission for the organization? Not just my task. What's the mission for the organization? That's the dream. The team, who are the people I need who understand the problems we're facing, and can control the resources and coordinate and synchronize them and what have you. And then that routine is having a drill which you might create really quickly, but having a rhythm, having a routine, so people know, when are we going to talk again? When's the next time we're coming back? What have I got to do by when? And so on. So creating that routine. So dream team routine, I think, is part of that. And I think when I look back at the military, you know, we had you know, great military manuals about how to do this. But Anna has kind of encapsulated it for me in those 3 words: dream, team, routine.
I like that. I really like that. It's really good, actually. And just going, we talked earlier on about how, you know, mentioning it, the emotiveness of crisis actually is really helpful in a situation. I'd like you to talk a bit why that's really helpful, and how do we stop sort of hairs running, I guess, but also in your context of working in Ukraine, how that's perhaps not been either flagged properly or communicated well, and just talk a bit more about that, really.
Well, yeah. So one example, one of my clients. So I was in Kyiv on the 24th of February, when the war started, and the team I was with, we had to rapidly relocate ourselves to Romania in order that we can be in a place where we can be safe and support our clients' people. There were a number of them who were in Ukraine, just carrying on with their jobs. And I was talking with the crisis management team who were based in the United States, in the UK, in Poland, and so on. And they were, and it is amazing. They were really proud and quite emotional about this, woman getting on with her job in Ukraine. I thought that's fantastic. But there's a problem that I need these people to move. We genuinely believed Kyiv was about to be encircled, and there were people in Kyiv who we could get out, but they were nervous about moving. And they were frightened of a journey, and so on. And the expression was used, it's great that they're getting on with their job because it's taking their mind off this awful situation. And I said, I don't want their mind taken off it. I need them to understand the severity of the situation that they are in so that they are making informed decisions. We can't order them to move. But if we don't let them focus on the situation they're in, we're disempowering them. And that's either because we're not sharing information about the severity of risks or our ability to help. And so that's what I mean when I say there's a danger of becoming a bit patronizing if you try and avoid the emotive language. And you've got to treat people with adults, and if there genuinely is danger, and that might be, if there's in a commercial organization, there's real risk to people's jobs. I believe, you should be honest with people about that. You should be honest. You shouldn't exaggerate it and try and scare them into working harder for you. And isn't that great? And it's not a healthy environment. People are frightened for their jobs. But if people realize, we need to pull together here, this is a real problem. And my sister-in-law has a pub. COVID was a massive challenge. And getting that team of her team to pull together, especially when they came out and were able to have people in outdoors, that was really, really hard work. And new ways of doing things, and getting them to pull together to understand, if we don't make this work, I might not be able to make my business survive. And I don't want that to happen. But I can't give you a job if I fail. So having a grown-up conversation, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in terms of the role of leadership in how we communicate that we're in a crisis and there's some sort of sense of jeopardy in this scenario, and then from flagging it and creating that sort of sense of seriousness. But how do we then manage that through with people? How do we take people through that without them feeling like your scenario, they're going to lose their job, and fear and all those things, which can, again, create the wrong actions and behaviors, unfortunately. So how do we instill that right motivation, but also manage that through in a way that keeps people sort of level-headed appropriately?
And that, ultimately, I think that the key to this starts long before you get in a crisis. And it is in having strong, effective relationships with your people. Now, we at the top of the show, you asked what I love about what I do, and I do love what I do. But there are people who just come to work to pay a check, and who aren't passionate about your company, and they don't. That's fine. They've got other things in their lives they're passionate about. But you still need them to focus and understand. I'm asking quite a lot of you right now, and this is why I am asking it. But also there is while recognizing the jeopardy in the situation, the severity of the problem, the challenges that we're facing, it is important to be enthusiastic and energetic, and to show people that you are confident, even if sometimes you're not quite, and that's a tricky thing. But that you are confident we can get through this, we can succeed, we can, it will pass, and we will come out of this stronger. Maybe we'll come out of it different, and maybe who knows? There'll be changes. We're not. Response and recovery are important parts of managing a crisis, and to me, are all about moving forward. It's not about how do I get back to where I was. How do I move forward to where I need to be? Which might be the same as it was before the crisis, but then again, it might not. Those relationships, they've got to be built on trust, and that's for me where that tension. If you're, sometimes when you're a little bit worried and not completely confident, it feels dishonest to portray confidence that you perhaps don't feel. But I still think that that it is valuable that if people know you're doing your utmost, that there is a sound plan that they understand and they know what they're trying to achieve within it and what the plan is trying to achieve, that we're doing our best to get all the resources that people need. And it comes back to back in the military and the principles of war, one of which is the maintenance of morale and people feeling confident and able to go forward, and that what they're trying to do is worthwhile and valuable.
Yeah, I mean, but I had a crisis one in an organization where we had a number of people in our factories were striking, which was impacting our products. Basically, we were running out of our products we could sell to our customers, and that went on for about 4 or 5 weeks. So major crisis, major impacts. And I found one of the ways to handle the morale and everything else that was going on was I held ended up being daily meetings with the various key people, and that at times, I think weekly it got a bigger meeting, bigger team, smaller, and that communication in person, allowing people to vent their challenges, their frustrations, but also I was very honest at times if I didn't know the answers, or I'd get back to people, and just that continual communication, and also by email and everything else, helped that somebody was on it. We're moving forward. It's not great, but this is how we're handling it. And that, what other ways have you found when you get into that crisis? What else can we do to really help keep that morale going, keep us going forward, and keep us in a place where we're still making progress?
Well, I mean, there is a sort of an expression called leadership by walking around, and being seen and being visible is important. That people are wired differently, and there are people who are really, really good at managing business as usual. I mean, and I don't want to sort of devalue those. They're really important skills of understanding the data, building plans to the nth degree that really, really work quickly and smoothly and efficiently. But the character traits that make someone, or whatever, the personality traits, whatever they are, the skills that come together to give someone expertise in that area, can often be make them poorly equipped to handle a crisis. They're not comfortable with ambiguity. They don't like making decisions when there's not enough information. They don't like winging it. And so getting the right leadership, getting people who are comfortable in that with that kind of the chaos of crisis is important. I mean, there is military. I remember doing it was an exercise, but there were real bullets being fired, and they're coming over our heads, about 2 meters above our heads. And the machine gun that's firing these it's just fixed, so we're safe. But it's getting hot, and the barrel is melting, and the bullets are getting closer. And one of my section commanders ran past and said, "Oh, don't worry about it, sir. It's more realistic." And we all laughed. And that was important, that had to have that, actually, do you know what? It is a bit more realistic. We're still very safe. I am going to get them to stop firing that machine gun. But those human moments, and humor is really important. And sometimes that humor might be a bit sort of gallows humor, and particularly in a military context. And it might not be very politically correct. And you've got to be really careful, with that. people from my background, we talk about, swearing like a trooper is an expression, isn't it? And I'm consciously not swearing now. I think I've succeeded. But in different contexts, that language is not appropriate. And finding a way of bringing humor and human contact, that our discussion isn't just about the problem, isn't just about work, but is about us as people as well. And doing that in the way that is context respectful of the context that you're in, is really important.
Yeah, I think as any crisis, any situation, we've got to take stock of, we've got people, and be mindful of it's a people game as much as anything else. You can strategize, know stuff, but actually it's the people thing. And I think bringing humor into it is really helpful. It lightens the load, lightens the sort of sense of, doesn't take the seriousness away from it all, but it just relaxes people a little bit, and that's important. Just before we finish, what sort of, I suppose, things we have to think about if we're, I suppose, preparing and anticipating a crisis situation, as in before we even get there, what sort of things should be put in place, I guess, as a leadership?
Well, I mean, we said earlier on, failing to plan is planning to fail. And we should plan, but plans aren't going to solve everything. And I love, it's a brilliant quote from that great business guru, Mike Tyson, who says, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that kind of recognizes that the plan's not going to be it's not going to work like your plan says it's going to work. And you need to be able to adjust that plan on the hoof. And to me, I mean, fundamental thing that every organization should do to make it a nicer place to work, to make it a more successful organization, to make it more resilient, is focus on building those relationships where people genuinely trust. And I don't, that team building is a bit sneered at. We go walking for a day. What's the point of that? Well, there are really imaginative ways of building trust within an organization, and that has got to be the fundamental thing. And then understanding what are where is our jeopardy? What are the things that are going to be bad for us? Who are the people I want to get in the room? What are the questions I need? We need to ask each other, and it's perfectly acceptable as the leader to say, what's the problem? What are we going to do? You don't have to come in with all the answers. In fact, I don't think you should. And so I'm practicing that, so that you do get people used to the idea that business as usual is fine when it's usual, but things will change. And that makes for a more dynamic, more resilient organization. If you focus on the relationships, a better place to work, and a more fun, engaging, and maybe some of those people who just turn up for the paycheck might actually start to love it. Who knows?
Indeed, and I think making organisations more resilient by being ready to adapt and be agile is really important, because, as you say, we might have a plan, but it's never going to go to plan as such. And being able to, I suppose, adapt accordingly in a way, and have that mindset that things may change. I really enjoyed our conversation, David. Thank you for the insights. I love the sort of military analogies and the real life experience you got there. Appreciate that. If people are interested in what you've just talked about or want to connect with you, what's the best way of doing that?
So the best way is almost certainly LinkedIn. So they can see you've spelled my name correctly, and it's on the little banner under my video. So David Brambell is pronounced but spelled Brambell. Find me on LinkedIn. Or Capo Consulting Limited is my company that I operate as an independent consultant, helping organisations prepare and respond to just the kind of crises we've been talking about.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your time today, David.
Not at all. Thank you.